Before I was chair, I was teaching, professor at a university, at Arizona State University. I was also working with foundations on strategic planning and evaluation, special initiatives. And I was a member of the National Council on the Arts, which is the advisory body to the National Endowment for the Arts. I don't consider myself an artist. Very early in my life, though, I was clear that the arts are so foundational to a healthy existence. And I think this was just a result of how I was raised with parents who were not artists and not wealthy patrons, but somehow had a deep appreciation for the role that the arts played for them and historically for their communities. So in the first 100 days, I had some appreciation for the Arts Endowment because I had a long relationship with it. And this in part had to do with my membership on the National Council on the Arts, and even prior to that, informally involved in some of the research that the National Endowment for the Arts had done for many years, and helping that evolve. In the first 100 days as chair, though, what hit me was, one, this is a huge country, and there was a lot of travel that took me to communities where the National Endowment for the Arts supports really important work. And I was so inspired by the gratitude that I heard from people in all kinds of communities for what the NEA had made possible for them, whether they were artists or they were leaders in communities that had benefited from programs that were supported by the National Endowment for the Arts. There were many, many different ways that the NEA showed up in people's lives in the communities that I visited, and it was really beautiful to hear the appreciation for what the organization made possible. I think the mission of the NEA, or its reason for being, is to ensure that all people in our country have access to the arts, to important arts experiences, to arts education. And I think that the mission remains the same, although it's important that we continue to reinterpret it for the times. So as we understand more about different communities and the cultural legacies that they bring and have to offer to our American tapestry, the more we learn about how to serve, which is what the NEA is there to do. So, yeah, I'm a firm believer that the arts at their most powerful don't exist in a vacuum, in a bubble, but that they are part of our everyday lived experience, and that we should have access to them in all facets of our lives. I'm an urban planner by training, and I was always, I've always thought that the arts are important, full stop, and that the arts are critically important to so many of the things that we aspire to as a nation of opportunity. And the ability to make sure that the arts exist at the intersection of education, health, the shape of our built environment. All of these things were really important to me. And some of the language that I used when I was chair to help communicate that was that we all should aspire to have artful lives, and that the arts must exist, and they must also exist at the intersection of these other aspects of our daily lived experience. So the partnerships and relationships that we were able to either strengthen, expand, or start with other federal agencies was something that I felt very strongly about and was very proud of towards the end of my tenure. I think I take an expansive lens when I think about and talk about artful lives, because I think that the default societal notions of how we interact with the arts tends to favor the idea of the consumption of the arts, and attendance at a performance or the purchase of an artwork. And I think that that is without question important. And I think it's also important to think about making, doing, teaching, learning, all of these other ways of engaging with the arts. So an artful life can include, of course, trips to museums and participation as audience at concert, but it might also include singing in a choir or having a creative practice that is part of what makes you whole, what makes you healthy, what allows you to express your full humanity, whether that's at home or in a concert with other people in your neighborhood, or with family. There's something really important about recognizing our ability to be creators and our ability to have and cultivate a dynamic and fulfilling creative life. I think that we have to be good stewards of our humanity. And that isn't something that is always accounted for with market forces exclusively. So in places, particularly in places that are remote and may not have access to arts organizations, or in places where there can be really important history and a lot of talent, but perhaps not the built-in mechanisms to make that available. It's important that as a society, It's important that as a society, part of how we care for each other includes making sure that we're tending to our creative lives, that we are helping artists to deliver the gifts that they have to offer to the world, and making sure that everybody has that opportunity is something that requires additional attention beyond just market forces. I think people default to the economic development argument, and I think it's an important one. And actually, the National Endowment for the Arts has a relationship with the Bureau of Labor Statistics that talks about allows us to talk about the arts and the cultural economy as a creative economy as part of GDP, gross domestic product, and that's something that stands and is important. That said, there's so much research now that points to the benefits of having a creative practice, the benefits of connection to other people. And I think especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, as people were searching to reconnect or somehow became more aware of the importance of human connection and the ability to act as a community, it became really easy to point to how the arts are a critical element of that. In recent years, there's been more and more research on what at the time people were talking about the crisis of loneliness and disconnection. The Surgeon General talked about that. And I think that there was awareness that tending to our creative lives, both as individuals and as communities, is incredibly important and can help to address that wellness need, if you will. So there's that. I think that there's also, and I believe this to my core, that without access to the arts, our own creative expression, the creative expression of other humans, the ability to ask questions and imagine a world, the ability to be curious about each other and hear each other's stories, we can't have a working democracy. So I think that there's a critical role for the arts and arts participation as we think about stewarding a healthy democracy. I think in times when we're polarized and divided, the things that allow us to see each other as humans, the things that allow us to be curious about someone else's story, someone else's point of view, what they think and how they feel, what their history has been. If we don't have those kinds of opportunities, which is what the arts allow, that's what the arts provide. If we don't have that, that's a huge missing element. And I can't see reconciliation. I can't see coming together as a whole without those kinds of opportunities to truly see each other's humanity. I'm so proud to have had so many years of affiliation with the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm grateful for everything it's been able to contribute to our country to this point. And I'm hopeful that as a country, we continue to embrace the arts, that our love of humanity, of freedom, of connection, of care, of all the things that are possible because we can express ourselves through the arts and get to know our fellow citizens. I hope that there are many more years ahead of public support, of the fuel that makes the best of our country possible. I think the thing that is one of the many things that is beautiful about what the National Endowment for the Arts does is that its mission is truly about everyone. And that isn't necessarily true with any other funder. And I think that as a public entity, it is precisely that focus on all that we should embrace. I don't know that philanthropy has the same edict or the same responsibility. I think part of what makes the Arts Endowment singular and different from other arts funders is that obligation to ensure that all people in our beautiful country have access to these experiences that are so necessary. One of the things that I was keenly aware of when I was chair was how important it was for the National Endowment for the Arts to really see itself as part of the federal family and a contributing part of the federal family. So we built on existing relationships with other federal agencies, strengthened and expanded those, and created new ones. And I think underneath all of that was the firm belief that the arts have something to offer, and that none of the other dimensions of government could actually do their best work without the integration of arts, culture, and design into what they did. And whether that was, physical investments in transportation or advances in how we think about health and wellness. There were so many opportunities to bridge and demonstrate how cultural organizations, artists, people involved in their own creative practice had something to do with the positive evolution of our cities, towns, and communities. And that's something that I think is perpetually important. It doesn't go away. The other thing that I want to call attention to is the importance of the National Endowment for the Arts connection to state arts agencies, local arts agencies, and the ability to understand that what I used to call the vertical axis. To understand that it's not a one-way street, right? It's not just a top-down thing, but that we had to pay attention to what was going on at the local level and understand innovation and practices that needed to be lifted up and learned from and well understood in order for us at the federal level to do our best work. So there are these really important connections between and among the National Endowment for the Arts, the state arts agencies, the regional arts organizations, local arts agencies, and all of these entities that at their best are working at different scales but rowing in the same direction, and that is to ensure that all Americans have access to the arts. Absolutely. I think research and discovery and our consistent commitment to better understanding how people live their lives, how people participate in culture, the impacts of cultural participation in so many different realms. This is a critically important part of what the National Endowment for the Arts does. And one of the things that I would put forward when I was chair was that the NEA isn't just a funder; it is a national resource, and that our ability to have a national view, a bird's eye view, and a perch that allows us to understand, what is happening in these extremely diverse communities that we need to understand in order to do our best work. That the research function, the analysis, the continuous discovery, this was a really important part of what the NEA has to offer.